we can do a kind of a recap. Taylor and I were briefly in LA, so we had our own crowded theater experience at the New Beverly, going to see Richard Pryor live. He is not alive. He is dead. But that was the title of a film that was filmed prior to his death when he was performing.
Pryor.
Richard Pryor. And we're back. Woo! Nice. Welcome back to another episode of the Crowded Theater Podcast, y'all. The only podcast, the only movie podcast where all the movies are seen in theaters. We do not cheat. We do not watch them on DVD or streaming at home. No, we watch them among the people. And again, I would like to reiterate that we have done no research actually to confirm whether or not we're the only one. We just like to assert it strongly. I'm Kyle.
I'm Taylor.
And I am Cliff.
That's right.
Confidence is a real game changer.
Confidence
you
is
say
key.
Things very, very clearly and strongly.
Right.
People will think that you know what you're talking
That's
about.
right. That's right. I believe that is the secret. We'll just assert it, and then all of the other podcasts will fall before us, etc. Hey, guys. How are you? How has this last week been? And stuff.
It's been good. We've been out of town, so it's nice to be back in
That is a
Austin
good point.
And back into a home.
Actually, that's worth bringing up. Taylor and I had our own. We can do a kind of a recap. Taylor and I were briefly in LA, so we had our own crowded theater experience at the New Beverly, going to see Richard Pryor live. He is not alive. He is dead. But that was the title of a film that was filmed prior to his death when he was performing.
Pryor.
Richard Pryor. was performed Richard Pryor to his death. There you go. Anyway, so that was a lot. That was a lot of fun. We got to go to New Beverly, which I had not been to in a few years.
We're a very enthusiastic LA crowd. They're very, very into all of his jokes.
Yes, and then Taylor fell asleep before I got the. Unfortunately, we had to skip out on the second movie of the double feature, which was
late.
It was very late, and Taylor was mostly asleep during the Richard Pryor film.
Hey.
But the second film of the double feature was Eddie Murphy's Raw, which I would have really loved
been really awesome.
to sit around to stick around and see an LA crowd react
Maybe we should
to
have
Raw.
gone out and got me a monster or something.
Perhaps. But nevertheless, we saw it, we did that, and then, Cliff, you and I have actually, you had some, while we were out of town, you had some experiences that pertain directly to this film.
Yes. While y'all were out of town, I had my own solo double feature. Not solo, because I was amongst the people in the theaters, of course, of a double feature on Friday night of Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive, because of all those David Lynch movies playing, because our good friend David Lynch has passed recently.
Exactly.
He is sailing the seas of cheese, as it were.
That's right. That's the big, unfortunately, the sad headline. Cliff, you were a big Twin Peaks person. You owned at least 7 Twin Peaks shirts and Mulholland Drive shirts.
All of which are dirty at the moment, so I'm wearing a Bill and Ted shirt.
Which feels appropriate on some level, I guess. But so yeah, this was a very sad day. Cliff and I are big fans of David Lynch, and when we got back, we all then went to go see Mulholland Drive, a film that
kind of has to be seen in theaters.
Yes, I agree. Why do you say that? Elaborate.
I just think it's such a atmospheric and even dreamlike of a movie that while you can enjoy it at home and you can enjoy it amongst friends at home or even solo, I think because it's so. What does it mean at the end? Like you kind of need, I say need to see it with a bunch of people just to kind of really fully and capture. Also, what the point of this podcast is that it is whole
I 100%
an experience in a movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think films that have that are that abstract and that subjective really benefit more than anything from having a large crowd around you.
For sure.
Because everyone kind of tunes more into their subconscious when they're around the crowd anyway, and those are films that are more felt than they are intellectualized. And as much fun as it is to talk about, I sure hope it's fun to talk about Mulholland Drive and intellectualize it. We're going to be doing a lot of that here today. As much as that is as fun as that is, I think that the emotions are felt so much more. I think even is another weird example, but a somewhat abstract movie, just because I think it was cut to death, even if it wasn't actually intended to be that way, is Tony Scott's The Hunger. And I remember the incoherent editing and crazy stuff making no sense at home. And then we went and we saw The Hunger in a crowded theater. At one point, and suddenly everything in the film made sense to me, and I liked the film a whole lot more. And I think that so how was the Blue Velvet screening, Cliff?
Oh, it was spectacular. It was notably not as full as the Mulholland Drive screening, though it was a bit earlier. But it is really interesting that when I first saw Mulholland Drive in the theaters back when it was new,
Yes, which we should get to in a moment. Yeah,
but David Lynch was primarily known and for Blue Velvet as his main masterpiece film, and here's this new film, Mulholland Drive, coming along. But after all these years, he probably is best known as a film for Mulholland Drive. But yes. Blue Velvet is spectacular in the theater just because, one, as everyone who's seen Blue Velvet knows, it starts off with one tone and in one universe, and then you dive deep down into the muck of a different universe rather suddenly. So, and it does such a good job at establishing the, innocent 50s tone in the beginning and the switcheroo in the closet, looking through the closet what is it, gaps in the closet blinds, whatever, in Dolores' apartment. Dolores, right?
Yeah,
no,
Dorothy, there you go.
Yeah, in Dorothy's apartment. Takes people for such a loop tonally. It was just glorious listening to the reactions in the audience of everyone just being shocked and squirming and all that. And a huge laugh line coming from when he's, Kyle MacLachlan the next morning is talking to Sandy, the Laura Dern character, on the phone. And she asks, how did it go? And he says, all right. Or, it went okay.
And his face is all,
And, huge laugh line from the audience because it went so not okay in so many ways that we know he cannot tell Sandy.
Yeah, so, that's and we had kind of gotten greedy and revisited Blue Velvet at home right after David Lynch died, just a couple days later. So it's fresh in the mind, though I didn't get, unfortunately, the chance to see it in the theater. And then we have had a couple interesting interactions with the theater with David Lynch recently because we tried
to see Mulholland Drive.
We tried to see Mulholland Drive like that week, and again, we are not good at planning, which is why we ended up in the back row of the Paramount for From Dusk Till Dawn. So we just strolled right in about 20 minutes before and expected to buy tickets. And of course, Mulholland Drive normally is one of the films, and this has been true for years, even before David Lynch died, one of those only films that really creates a line at the indie theater. It hits that perfect place between film people and students and people who are looking for an excuse to go to a kind of independent movie theater. So while theaters are sometimes half full, there's always more of a line for David Lynch. And so, right after he passed away, unsurprisingly, the AFS Theater here in Austin quickly programmed a whole bunch of screenings that were more being added all the time. And we arrogantly thought we were just going to stroll right into a primetime Mulholland Drive screening, and it was sold out with signs on the door. So rare is this an occasion at the AFS. They had signs on the door turning away people saying this screening is sold out. So it really appears that the people have turned out to celebrate the life of David Lynch, to celebrate the work of David Lynch, because we were turned away. No more room at the inn for that first Mulholland Drive screening before Taylor and I left for LA. We had to see it when we got back. So that only further whetted the appetite to then see it when we got back, which was actually kind of fun because we were just in LA for a few days. And then we were just on Sunset Boulevard, and then we sat down in the theater to watch Mulholland Drive. And the sign right at the beginning, as Rita descends the hill from Mulholland Drive, and the camera settles on Sunset Boulevard. Taylor gave me a couple nudges with her elbow, like, "Hey, we were just there." What was nice, though, is that the David Lynch in memoriam fever has not cooled, and we were in yet another very, very packed screening even a week later for Mulholland Drive. And so we got a just robust kind of, not just experience of the crowd during the movie, but even prior. The people who were sitting right behind us were talking out loud about David Lynch, about what they had thought about Blue Velvet, about how one of the parties had never seen Mulholland Drive before, and this was their first experience of the movie, and other movies they liked, etc. Everyone was just tightly packed. There was an energy to it. It was very cool. And then the movie played really, really fucking well, I think.
Really great theater experience.
Really good.
Full theater.
Yeah, what was your take? So, Taylor, to kind of give a little bit of context here before we dive into Mulholland Drive and our experience here, we have a couple prior screenings of note, one of which is that both Cliff and I saw Mulholland Drive in its first run back in 2001, I think.
Saw it on my first semester away from college in the Dobie Theater.
Yes, the now defunct Dobie Theater.
The now defunct Dobie Theater in the now quasi-defunct Dobie Mall. It had a
Here in
cool...
Austin, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was where the first QT Fest was held.
Yes, and it had the Egyptian theater in it too. Every theater was painted a different kind of theme. So like one of the theaters had like spooky gothic stuff and like gargoyles in it, and then the biggest theater had Egyptian bullshit all painted all over the walls. And in a fun twist of fate, after they gutted the shit out of that space after it was closed, Taylor actually worked the front desk at a co-working space that occupied the same spot. So where we used to buy tickets to Kill Bill Volume 1 in its first run at the Dobie Mall, Dobie Theater, Taylor was a receptionist. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the wheel always turns, because those very same posters that were on the walls and whatnot were not taken with at the Alamo or whatever theater. They were literally left there. So the Dobies, the company that I worked for that used the Dobie location, literally had those same posters as the wall decor for our bathrooms, our hallways, and even some of the offices.
They were all film themed.
It was all film themed. It was all filmed. It was like Casablanca, other
King Kong.
Thank you.
And do you know that for a fact they came from the theater?
Oh, I
prior
know
to
that for a fact.
Oh,
actually,
very
yeah.
cool. That's awesome. That's
it was. They were recycled or donated. And it was done legitimately, but it was just they didn't take them with them. They just kind of let the next company use them.
That's so funny. So, Cliff, where you saw free, what were you, probably like 18 years old or something?
Yeah, it was 17.
17.
Seeing that the first time, first of all, seeing it the first time, I, by the end of the movie, didn't get it. And was because I was such a linear-focused mind at the time. I was like, this is fucking bullshit. This
You had
makes
not
no
seen
sense.
Twin Peaks, had not seen Blue
no,
Velvet. You were like a 17-year-old who had just gone.
Yes. I think I probably hadn't seen any David Lynch other than the Dune, his Dune movie, which we saw, though I didn't really connect it to David Lynch or this, so saw it pretty much cold.
Yeah.
And but I was fascinated enough by it that I saw it multiple times while I was at the theater.
Well, I can say I remember. So one interesting fact about that period, 2001, is that was when Cliff had left to go to UT as an aerospace engineering major to become a rocket scientist. And I was still back in Carrollton because I had yet to leave for UT and go to college. I was still going to high school. And so, but I remember you enthusiastically telling me about this movie, Mulholland Drive, I had to see. And surprisingly enough, our parents were hip enough to know who David Lynch was because, of course, they had watched Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet. And so my dad drove us from Carrollton, Texas to downtown Dallas. It was like 45-minute drive to go to the Angelica Film Center they had just opened in Dallas. And we went to the Angelica Film Center in Dallas, and me and my dad saw Mulholland Drive. And what I can say is that for a long time, I would give people my interpretation of Mulholland Drive, and they were very impressed that I had like a really smart read on the movie, but I just totally stole it from my dad, who actually was the person who had a good read on the movie. I was like 15 years old. I had no idea. I loved it. I loved everything. I loved the boobs, too.
The
boobs and the girls making out with other girls were very titillating. But I really I was a huge film fan, and I mean by this point Cliff and I, in addition to having watched a bazillion horror movies and all the Stanley Kubrick movies and all this stuff, so we were very curious about cinema and stuff. So I remember really digging the film, but having no way of it really reconciling the first half and the second half. It was just a total blank. And then it was my dad, who of course had watched all of Twin Peaks and had seen Blue Velvet and sort of knew what the deal was with a David Lynch movie. Sort of just quickly as we were leaving the theater, he's like, well, everything before they were in that blue box was a dream, and everything after they went through the blue box was the reality. And then as soon as he said that, I was like, whoa! And I started piecing the thing together from that point. But he gave me the Rosetta Stone, by which I was like, and then I was like, oh my God, and the box is blue and the key's blue. And when that lady comes and says, your name isn't Betty, she's got a blue thing on her head. I just remember and that unlocked just a new way of thinking about movies, to the point where we started thinking in that kind of somewhat symbolic way a lot, perhaps to our detriment, when making movies. for a long time, and I just remember that third eye just being opened by watching this movie, and then suddenly and so when it came out on DVD, of course, we watched it many more times, blah 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 blah. So anyway, but I remember that was really cool, and then we quickly saw the rest of David Lynch's. We were both 2 years later in film school, so we were issued all of David Lynch's movies to watch, and we did, and then. Fast forward 15 years, I think you and I and Cliff, we all together went to go see Mulholland Drive a few months ago, maybe a year plus ago, with Rebecca Del Rio from the film. She was touring around, and she, at the Alamo Drafthouse, sung several David Lynch songs, including the Crying. I don't know what's the Spanish, Yolando?
Yeah, Yolando.
Exactly. So she sung those prior to the movie.
The whole thing didn't fall over in the middle or nothing.
She did not fall over in the middle.
Yes,
that's true. And there wasn't a band, no I Banda, but in fact it was a recording as a backing track. But she was singing, and she did some of the song, like the Julie Christie songs from Twin Peaks or something.
Julie Cruz.
Julie Cruz. There you go. Did some of those, and it was a cool experience. And that was the first time you saw Mulholland Drive, and I don't know if it made a huge impression. What do you recall from that screening?
Unfortunately, very little, as it turns out. We had a whole conversation before we saw it. This is the second time of whether or not I had seen it. And I had recollections of it while we were... And I do remember her singing. Like, I remember because we've seen a couple of live things at different movies, and movies that I don't see or have any like familiarity with. So oftentimes they do kind of come together. But I did quite enjoy the screening both times. I did, I both... and definitely left this most recent screening really enjoying the movie.
No, excellent. No, that's I think we all had a really good time this time. Yeah, I think it was the kind of thing where I think without any context for kind of what you were going to, it's kind of like when we started watching Robert Altman movies. It can sometimes be very, very hard for it to penetrate even to the level of emotions. If you're thinking, kind of what the hell is going on here? What am I watching? Why are characters being called by different names?
Figure out the rules here, man.
Yeah, exactly. Been huge fans of David Lynch for a long time. I think anyone who is either a film fan or tries to make films has to, on some level, reckon with David Lynch, because there's a lot of sort of for lack of a better word, classicism in film. Not classism, but classicism. Very important extra C and I in there. What I mean by that is there's a lot of people who really live and die by the idea that a film needs to be told according to a certain structure, a certain narrative prescription. There are only 7 stories. That there's the archetypal view of that. There's the more mercenary commercial view of that, about needing to hit certain page numbers and structures and ideas about character and genre and all that kind of stuff. And you have to, on some level, reckon with David Lynch, because for the most part, people who make films that are as abstract as the films that David Lynch makes are relegated forever to niche status, and no one, they don't penetrate the zeitgeist, they don't do any of those things. And yet, David Lynch, and you can say that, whether or not there were other forces at work that led to him being acutely commercially successful and culturally significant, and whereas other more abstract filmmakers weren't. But at the same time, he consistently was creating cinematic objects that were, utterly incongruous with what anyone else were doing, and that were consistently penetrating and re-penetrating the zeitgeist. If you look at what he did with Eraserhead, if you look at what, even if you skip over Dune, you look at what he was able to then become reborn, rebirth his career, something
like that
with Blue Velvet. You look at what he then how that was transmuted into Twin Peaks, and then all these years later, Mulholland Drive. I remember just making a huge splash culturally that I feel like has only grown. I mean, it's just, again, one of those only movies that it's like, if you're showing up to whatever your city's indie movie theater is, the only time you need to get there, 30 minutes early is when they're playing Mulholland Drive, because then everyone comes out of the woodwork to see it. So what is that? What is that X factor? What is that thing that David Lynch possesses? I don't know, but we're going to get to the bottom of it at the end of this podcast, I am sure. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the screening. Let's talk about the movie. Let's talk about all of that stuff that happened. But before we do, y'all, as a kind of catalyst to begin our official conversation about Mulholland Drive and end this preamble, we must, of course, consult the spirits. We, of course, can only speculate as to the meanings of Mulholland Drive, but the spirits themselves will show up via our... Where is it? It's behind me.
The computer.
It's behind the computer is where it is. Via this tarot card, which was drawn prior to the film. And again, I'm going to just say real quick, never has there been a film more appropriate for a tarot card draw than David Lynch's oeuvre in memory of him, as Twin Peaks and a lot of his other work have tarot cards and other tarotic imagery in it. So, Taylor, flip over that card and tell me what it's about. Hey, it's the Queen of Wands. Oh, well, that is actually quite perfect. Here, let me hold this up. So we have the Queen of Wands to begin our conversation about David Lynch, and I want everyone to look at the bottom of the Queen of Wands. There is a little black cat. Do you see the little black cat? So the Queen of Wands, she is the only queen who sits with both of her knees sort of spread in front of us in a somewhat masculine and somewhat provocative way. And she also has a black cat that would have been considered somewhat bad luck.
Omen.
Yeah, sort of a dark omen sitting in front of her. And a lot of that, the Queen of Wands has a full appreciation for passion and for magic. She does her own thing. She goes her own way. She follows her passions, and the black cat is sort of symbolic of that, a somewhat goetic symbol that people associated with witchcraft or with dark spirits, and yet she keeps the black cat with her. And what could be more appropriate for David Lynch, someone who, as we were saying, had a blessed career, in terms of like literally being courted to direct the third Star Wars film, making Dune. There's all sorts of ways he could have cashed in and made things that were... there's a world in which the careers of Tim Burton and David Lynch could have swapped, if the abstract nature of the early films of Tim Burton, he had decided some other path and he had some other nature, he could have gone on and done whatever he did.
Both very stylistic.
Yes, and David Lynch could have gone on and tried to force himself to make a bunch of very commercially viable projects, but add his own sort of aesthetic spin on it, which obviously David Lynch never would have done. But the point is, the little black cat here on this Queen of Wands card here is David Lynch. He's going his own way, and so let's talk about it. One of our favorite David Lynch films of all time, Mulholland Drive. Cliff, Mulholland Drive, the street is located in the city of Los Angeles. What does Mulholland Drive, what is its story, and what does that story have to say about Los Angeles?
Oh, the story of Mulholland Drive,
yes.
The movie? Well, let's see. It opens after a couple of brief images and scenes that we can't quite make sense of upon first viewing. It opens upon the street sign for Mulholland Drive and the limousine.
What opens, there's a bunch of swing dancing at the beginning.
There is swing dancing at the beginning, yes. And then a superimposed face, all in white. And then the POV, I can just talk through every shot in the movie if you want to do it this way.
Well, I think that for the most part, the story begins when Betty, a young girl who is blonde, gets out of gets off of an airplane in Los Angeles, the kind of classic story of a girl who has stars in her eyes and wants to, her two suitcases literally in her hands, coming from, I believe, where does she come from? In the middle of Canada. We ultimately find out. Ontario, there you go. Arrives in Los Angeles to be a movie star. She is an actress. She seems to have, again, a kind of blessed entry point into Los Angeles. She has an aunt who's involved in the business. She's greeted by two old people who are smiling and wishing her well. And the first little crack in this narrative that emerges is those two old people, because This is always an interesting moment in screenings because it gets a nervous laughter from people, is that these two old people who are all smiles and wishing Betty the best, and well, pretty soon we'll see you see your name in lights. Oh, won't that be the day? With all of these really fakey 80-yard lines and sunlight as she moves gracefully under a big banner that says "Welcome to Los Angeles" in big cartoony letters, is we cut away to these two old people driving away in their taxi cab, and they're utterly silent, and they have mask-like faces with grins on them, looking back and forth at each other. And then, just about the moment that becomes weird and uncomfortable, we jump back to Betty as she's whisked off to go see the amazing apartment she's going to go now stay in while her aunt's out of town, etc., etc., etc. And there's some interesting things about that, because it's the first little chink in the armor that lets you know that there is something wrong with this reality, that maybe the reality itself is being created and disappearing at Betty's convenience, and that those old people really are only there when Betty's around and don't actually exist in that car. That's why they're not talking to each other, and that kind of hinting that this, not unlike the heavily kind of microphone recorded 80-yard dialogue in that scene, tells you that maybe there is something fake about this. This is a fantasy. This is a dream. And that begins to slowly unravel over the course of it. But before we get to Betty, we have the scene where Rita, a dark woman, another figure from the tarot, the dark woman and the light woman. The dark woman is in a limousine when suddenly the drivers ominously turn around as if to assassinate her. And then suddenly, teenagers racing down the highway smash into the car. The two men who are going to kill her are killed themselves. She is saved by this car accident, ironically, and yet she clearly has sustained a head injury and wanders through the woods, not unlike an animal, literally ultimately crawling on her hands and knees to Betty's door and cowering, kind of like a stray cat or like a stray dog or a wounded something or other.
Black cat.
A black cat, exactly. She creeps into the woman's apartment, and that's when Betty meets Rita, who has amnesia from the car accident and is utterly dependent upon Betty to sort of figure out who she is and unravel, not unlike in Blue Velvet, not unlike in Twin Peaks, a kind of Nancy Drew-like mystery of how do we get to the bottom of who is this woman, where did she come from, etc., etc., etc. And that's where things start off, I guess. And we begin to get little hints at that mystery as we go, but Betty herself has a kind of her own career trajectory through these scenes that is somewhat charmed in nature. Go ahead, Cliff. Can you speak more to that? Like, how does Betty's experience trying to break into Hollywood in those first couple days perhaps differ from the experiences of normal folk?
Well, it goes pretty exceptionally well.
It
She
does.
goes there with an audition, and she knocks it out of the park, as the fellas say, and is whisked right to the top to meet the coolest director who's right on top of everything before it is taken away by the evil Hollywood conspiracy behind the darkness behind everything.
Yes. The darkness behind everything. Yes. No, that's the fun thing, is that we also, of course, have a third thread with the cool director, and no cooler guy than Justin Theroux to play this cool director, who is another figure who, not unlike the dark woman in the limousine, seems very powerful and very in control. He seems like a successful guy, and yet right away, not unlike the drivers turning around and pulling a gun on Rita, which is of course not her real name, she gets it from a movie poster after she gets amnesia. But he is in a scenario, a very interesting, weird, surreal meeting with Angelo Badalamenti and what are the names? What's the Italian
Dan Hedaya.
And Dan Hedaya. And what is the name of the brothers they play?
The Scigliani brothers. Something greasy and Italian.
That's
sounding.
right. and where he is basically a powerful director who clearly thinks a lot of himself, who is just having a choice taken away from him. Just two creepy guys show up, and in
This is the girl.
Yes, this is the girl, exactly. This is the girl, this is the girl. Tell him that this is the girl they will be casting for reasons that are utterly remain ambiguous throughout the film. You know, presumably there's an implication that there are dark things at work behind all of these things. And when all of these different threads of the first half of the movie ultimately converge, and after severe stress is placed upon our director, played by Justin Theroux, over the course of the next several scenes in the movie, which we'll get into, he ultimately chooses the girl from the photograph. He folds to the Scigliani brothers, or whatever the fuck it is. He folds to them, he chooses what they wanted, and it is clearly implied in that moment that Betty, who had crushed her first audition, may well have crushed this audition and won this fabulous lead in this period film set in the 50s that we're watching all of these different, that 6 of the top actresses want. And something is taken away, and right from that moment, Betty suddenly runs away and spirals down into darkness, further into darkness, as she unravels more of Rita's mystery, thus ultimately ending up at Club Silencio, which we'll get to in a moment. But Justin Theroux's thread that leads to that, as this creepy director, is hilarious and gets a lot of big reactions from the audience. Taylor, what did you think of his? What happens to Justin Theroux's? I know the director has a name. We're going to continue to call him Justin Theroux.
Yeah, his name's not important. No, he comes home after losing his ability to make this poor choice, and he finds out that his wife is indeed cheating on him with none other than the pool man, Billy Ray Cyrus himself.
That's right.
And my favorite part is that her reaction is, "You done it now. Like, why would you do this?"
Yes,
and I really enjoyed that. And I also kind of enjoyed the apologetic Billy Ray, like, you really shouldn't be treating your wife like this, man, pal. Like, that was all very, very fun, very on your head about what you expect.
What did you think of his reaction to take the jewelry and pour paint all over the jewelry?
That was also very creative, because I don't have jewelry that is particularly important to myself, but I can imagine that you can't get that off. Like, I imagine that is basically as good as setting it on fire, or what, so it is. And I do love a calm rage. I do love a very calm, well then fuck.
So with that character, what's interesting is that aspect of it, even though all the other aspects of Justin Theroux's story are clearly more arranged by his defying the will of these mafioso guys, that adds an almost cosmic component to it, where when he defies the will of the studio head, played by that little guy from the Red Room in Twin Peaks.
Little guy, tiny head, big body.
Tiny head, big body. I noticed that. It's more apparent when you're watching on the big screen that his head is with a full-size body on, in his wheelchair. When he defies the will of the studio heads, their dark will, whatever it is, every privilege, everything he has gained by obeying that dark will, becoming a director, and it is implied in various ways throughout the film that to get ahead in this particular world requires a certain darkness. Everything that he has done suddenly is stripped away. So he has no control. That is to say, immediately...
And all of his money is taken away, too.
And all of his money is... That's to say, Billy Ray Cyrus has sex with his wife, and then all of his money is taken away, and he's staying in a weird, surreal, shady motel. He then calls in a great scene when he calls his receptionist, who's just, it's another good moment.
That is also a fun
she's
little,
very good.
You don't even know what you're, I mean, you could just stay on my couch. Yeah, all right, well, you don't know what you're missing.
Exactly. That's another good moment. He then goes on to meet with the cowboy. He meets with the cowboy at a corral, and I believe, I wish I had looked this up prior, but I believe the cowboy himself is wearing like an actual period, like literally vintage Roy Rogers costume or something.
It's not
like
Roy
that.
Rogers. It was the coat worn by like the first Western movie star back in the silent era. So like the very, very beginning of Hollywood. The very, very beginning of Hollywood Westerns, an actual coat worn by that guy, implying that the cowboy goes all the way to the top, all the way back to the foundations of Hollywood at the beginning.
And he emerges from darkness darkness under this flickering light, and he again has a spectral presence, and especially knowing that about why is he the cowboy, and of course all of Hollywood was founded on westerns, California being doubled for Texas, westerns being shot in little facade towns that were then burned down. And so there's this idea that he's speaking for maybe the big head, little body guy, is the studio head, is some sort of golem of darkness serving darkness, but that he himself is a devil figure. He is this spirit of darkness. We don't know if it's 100% dark, but he is the spirit of the will of this place, of Hollywood, of LA, of the machine, of whatever it is. And so beautifully, I love at the end, and that is a scene that just gets silences the audience, gets nervous laughter, and even that especially that line, which is utterly unaffected, by the actor, but he says, no, you're not thinking, you're too busy being a smart aleck to be thinking. Just kind of quiets the audience. It just has this ominous quality to it, of just the cowboy owns him, and the cowboy isn't even talking to him as an equal. The cowboy is talking to him as a possession, and yet it's not played up from a place of strength. You have this guy who's very pale and has kind of a speech impediment, and is just dressed in this weird cowboy hat, and yet we know he speaks for something that is very elemental that he is contending with, and he just issues the only and perhaps most ominous threat in movie history, which is, you'll see me once more if you do good. If you do bad, you'll see me. Or sorry, if you do good, you'll see me once. If you do good bad, you'll see me 2 more times. Or I'm butchering the line.
Pretty close.
If you do good, you'll see me 1 more time. If you do bad, you'll see me 2 more times. Which again, what the fuck does that mean? But it's very, you get it. And so
we do see him 2 more times in that movie.
That's true. We do see him 2 more times, and he ends up folding. He ends up choosing, and that is the moment, literally, when the film picks up at that moment when Betty, after attempting to unravel the mystery initially attempting to unravel the mystery of Rita's car accident on Mulholland Drive, has the we should talk about the audition scene though before we move on to anything else, because again, I don't know. Nothing speaks more to what directing is or what film is than the juxtaposition of those 2 recitations of precisely the same dialogue. Yeah, and again, that's kind of a gimmicky thing. A lot of different filmmakers and stuff have played different scenes different ways. I mean, in a way, that's kind of what Rashomon is, playing the same idea through different emphases, and yet just that raw, bad recitation of the scene she's auditioning with her and Rita, which ironically, of course, is between them, sounds very false, but the actual text of it is speaking to the truth of the 2 of them. No, you shouldn't be here. This is your fault. All this other stuff. Yeah. But it's unaffected by any emotions, so we're not listening to what's actually being said, even though the dialogue is giving away the farm. And then the second time we see it in her audition, the second time that we see it, it is utterly transformed by, Betty being a good actress, but by some third thing that is evoked between the 2 actors. They play the scene close. It is dripping with subtext. It's dripping with what movies actually are. I mean, that's the thing that I think a lot of people in our highly Netflix-atized streaming textual world don't understand, is that the movies are not about the ability, to cram in a novel's worth of textual plot and incident into, and then film it so you can see it instead of reading it. It's like cinema is about the subtext that is played between the lines. It's about the fact that unlike the textual interiority or interior nature of a book, you see and experience on a visceral level the idea of 2 people playing. The classic example for given for actors is you give two actors the same dialogue and then you have them play it, and then you play it again as if one of the actors is seducing the other actor, and then the scene is utterly transformed. They can use banal dialogue about the flowers in the room or about it's hot out today, suddenly takes on this sexually charged subtext if one actor is seducing another. Ooh, it's hot out today. I'm not an actor. You see the magic that is performed. Then you tell the actors to play the exact same scene a second way, where the same character who is seducing wants to kill the other character, and that character knows that character wants to kill the other character. And suddenly there's this entirely ominous, weird foreboding behind every syllable as the actor implies something dark behind everything. And the reactions of the other actor fill the scene with a subtext that utterly transforms it beyond what is there textually. And that is what we see. But we also see this strange inversion, because the text, of course, is utterly meaningless between these two people, this weird kind of tan guy she's auditioning with, and Betty, and yet it has all of the emotion that is keying us into the truth, in a way, behind the relationship between Betty and Rita, which is that there is something destructive about them being there together, and that what's soon going to unravel, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's just a brilliant thing, and it's the kind of thing also that you just couldn't do unless you were a good director, but you also had someone like Naomi Watts, who is just fucking incredible in this movie. I think there's even we saw a behind-the-scenes clip, maybe this is right after David Lynch died, I don't know where I saw it, because I feel like the whole internet was flooded with it, but it's a scene of her in the party scene at the end, reacting to Justin Theroux, and spoiler alert, and what's-her-head's engagement. Camilla's engagement. And it's just her reacting the whole time and shaking and crying and twisting and just having this whole she has zero lines, but it's just her. And then the behind the scenes footage is that when David Lynch yells cut, all of the crew just starts applauding because she's just doing so fucking much. She has no line, she's just reacting, and yet she's building this whole fucking symphony out of reacting to what's going on. And again, obviously Naomi Watts went from being kind of unknown prior to this to then being a big star, and then she's in King Kong and all that other kind of shit after this, and for good reason. She was very good. She was very good in this film. So yes. Anyway, but so having covered the audition scene and all of what that means, we begin as Justin Theroux's character chooses someone else, and Betty and him only have that little moment of connection and eye contact.
We know she would have been the one.
Yes, exactly.
If there were justice in the world.
If there were justice, this would have been the thing. Her and Rita go and find, they try and track down Diane Selwyn, which is a name that Rita remembers, and ultimately who she thinks she may be. They find some weird, creepy little cottage apartments, which I believe, I'm trying to remember this, but I think those cottage apartments were built by Disney for Disneyland employees, I think I read at one point. So that's why they have this weird little cottage, look to them. Yeah, they were literally built, I think, to have a kind of whimsical thing to them, for the Disney employees to kind of live in, or Disneyland employees, maybe Disney employees, I don't know what. So weird, creepy little cottage apartments where they enter one of these apartments and discover a dead body. They discover a woman who is all rotted and gross and stuff.
Can you tell how the dead body died? Because I was looking very closely at it, and I was trying to see if it was supposed to imply an overdose or a...
It doesn't. It's
really
just ambiguous,
yeah. We can tell that it's probably a young woman because of how she's dressed, and but otherwise you just see that she just looks all gray and rotted and stuff.
And this has a kind
Can't
of...
even see a handgun nearby.
Yeah, that's what I...
Yeah, and this has a kind of reality-shattering effect where, not unlike crowded theater favorite films, Three Women, which we discussed last time, Rita is suddenly terrified and tries to cut off her own hair, and then suddenly is given a wig that makes her look exactly like Betty. And, again, shades of Vertigo echoing through here. Slowly, Rita seems to be becoming Betty, and then it is after that. Then the relationship between them is literally consummated as they enter naked in bed, where you see her boobs, and then they have sex, which was a very, very one of my favorite parts when I saw it when I was 15 years old. But
Can't imagine why.
Yeah, can't imagine why.
So artistic.
I know, it was very artistic, and that's why I liked it. So yeah, that is a scene that I feel like felt very, very crazy and provocative in 2001 when we saw it, and yet in 2025, in a kind of post-Pornhub world where everything is hypersexualized, and I feel like that's, whether it's, lesbian sex in movies and all that, it's interesting because we live in a more sexualized world where I feel like people are exposed to more explicitly sexual images, and yet within the context of a movie theater, films, as we have discussed many times these days, have been utterly desexualized.
I was about to say.
Yeah. The act of Naomi Watts and, what's the name of the
Laura
other actress?
Herring.
Yeah, Laura Herring having, this on-screen, lesbian love scene, sex scene, is somehow conceptually safer, and yet seeing something with that much kissing and pawing and touching and passion behind it in a movie theater just doesn't exist anymore. As we've talked about, we now live in a world where, it used to be one of the things people complained about in cinema was the kind of perfunctory nature of the romance in every movie. Now I would desperately like it back, rather than, again, I like aspects of a movie like Twisters we've talked about, but when, like, the main guy, Glenn Powell, and the main girl, blonde girl, are in a barn loft at Maura Tierney's, her mother's house halfway through the movie, and the consummation of their relationship is they hop on a computer and recalculate her science for 5 minutes, and at the end he runs through an airport just to nudge her on the shoulder and put his arm around her, and they can't kiss on the mouth. It's like, I think films have become infantilized to a insane degree. And so there is something that it's this weird thing where while the idea feels conceptually on some level less provocative because there is so much generally gay stuff out there in the world now, it feels more provocative to actually be in a movie theater watching a film that isn't from 1977, that actually has nudity and sex and all of that stuff in it. So it feels in that way almost anachronistic and more provocative than it once was. Anyway, but so they consummate their relationship. Taylor, thoughts on that?
More, please.
More, please. Good. And then from there, Rita wakes from her sleep saying the word silencio over and over again. So we've had
No
death.
Ibanda.
Yeah, no Ibanda. We've seen death. We've seen life. We've seen a kind of shattering of this investigation. It has reached a kind of bedrock, which is this dead woman. And they rise. She says, go with me somewhere. They get into a car. Literally, you see as they get into the car to go to Silencio, the 35mm film kind of runs out and they leave it there, so it like shakes off the fucking camera. And so it literally is as if the cinematic, dreamlike reality is beginning to crack apart, like a Don Hertzfeld short or something like that, where the paper crumples away as part of the animation. It's literally breaking apart all around us. And so they arrive at this club. Everything's lit in blue. The camera rushes in like it's Evil Dead 2 as they get out of the car. There's ominous papers being blown about outside. They enter this red theater. There's a creepy ass woman sitting in the balcony with a blue beehive, whatever the fuck. They sit down, and a crazy guy with a voice that sounds like this comes out and says, no Ibanda, there is no band. It is all a recording. It is all a tape recording.
It's all an illusion.
It's all an illusion. And then we experience that first with the trumpet that comes out, and we see, of course, a man who appears to be playing a trumpet. It's mixed like he's playing the trumpet, and then he takes his hands away, and we see that he is, in fact, not playing the trumpet. It is all a tape recording. So the magician has shown us its hand in advance, that this is all a recording. It is not real. And yet, even though we know that conceptually, intellectually, what happens next is one of the most powerful things in the movie, and I think one of the most unique, just speaks to the kind of unique nature of how David Lynch's cinema works, is that then Rebecca Del Rio comes out on stage to sing another Blue Velvet reference, a Roy Orbison song that connects that energetically. And she sings it in Spanish, so instead of crying, it's llorando. But it is so powerful and so authentically real. And we zoom in so close on her face and see her real emotions and see her voice trembling. And then we see not just her, but then we see Betty and Rita's reaction to her. We see them crying, which, as the song says, crying. They're crying and trembling and holding each other's hands, etc., such that when, even though we've known that we were told in advance that this was going to happen, when we realize that she's not really singing as she passes out, falls away from the microphone, and the music continues, and instantly in the mix there's this low, ominous rumble that's suddenly added, which is great to feel in the theater because no one consciously picks up on the fact that it happened because Llorando is still the only song playing, but suddenly "Bo" is added underneath it, and suddenly the girls are still crying, but they're not crying in exactly the same way. They're crying, as if they're lost in the woods. There's something that they're afraid of. There is something that they know conceptually is about to pierce this dream veil. And so they go back to the aunt's apartment and they discover, in that moment I've skipped, the whole theater fills with blue light. Naomi Watts begins to convulse just like she's Lily Rose Depp in Nosferatu. And then she opens her purse after that subsides, and we remove a blue cube that has a triangular hole in it that is the exact same hole shape as the key that they had found earlier in a suitcase full of money, which is the only thing that Rita had on her in a very kind of noirish way. What does this blue key mean? They go back, they open the blue key box, the camera disappears inside of the blue box falls to the ground, our two girls have vaporized, and suddenly we see the aunt wander through the apartment and look around, and there's no sign of them, as if they were phantoms that were never there. Maybe this apartment was even something that Betty saw herself at some point, just peering through a window at a life better than the one she had, that she never was actually in or a part of. She's not there because Betty is not Betty, as we soon realize afterwards. Betty is Diane. Diane Selwyn, right? We confirm that Diane Selwyn is in fact Betty's real name. And what's the first scene after we go through the blue box and then everything shakes apart? And then
she wakes up in her house with her ex-girlfriend coming to get her belongings.
Yes. And that was always kind of, go ahead.
Wakes up in the same position as the dead girl.
That's
the
right.
rotting
That's
dead
right.
girl.
Oh,
the
it's
cowboy,
time
the
to wake up.
cowboy
That's
peeks
right,
in. Time to wake up now, little girl. Seeing first an alive girl, then a dead rotting girl in that position, and then we come to see the living Diane Selwyn, as we camera slowly works its way around to reveal that it is Naomi Watts' face, but a Naomi Watts that has a very different vibe than Betty. Just immediately. In fact, I think it was an issue when the movie first came out, because Naomi Watts was completely unknown. She'd just done Australian TV before this, so she'd not really had any big Hollywood roles, and it was an issue apparently for some people not getting that it was the same actress.
Oh, wow.
Both playing Betty and Diane.
Yeah. What's interesting, it's a good point, because that the disparity between those two ways that Naomi Watts is playing Diane versus how she's playing Betty speaks to the relationship between that fantastic audition scene and everything we were talking about. Because subtext is just a fancy word for what is the soul, what is the meaning of the scene, and what is the meaning of this character, what is the vibe, what is that which is unspoken. And what is unspoken very clearly about Betty all the way through. You can see it radiating even when she's not speaking, is that Betty is just radiating sunlight and optimism and everything. Even when she discovers that maybe this woman, Rita, has wandered in off the streets, she always wants to give her the benefit of the doubt, and she seems so innocent and so radiantly positive that when you see Naomi Watts looking greasy and almost like her eyes are bruised from crying because she's just looks so exhausted, we know that this can't be Betty. It literally is a different person. And soon, and just like same with the Time to Wake Up, just like Glinda the Good Witch showing up in Wild at Heart, we can use one of David Lynch's favorite films, Wizard of Oz, to kind of decipher how this dream unravels, because as various characters pop in to Dorothy after she wakes up back in her black and white life, we are now see all the same faces we saw, except it's not Scarecrow and Tin Man and the Lion. It's all
there, and you were there, and you were there.
Exactly. We can see the dreamlike relationship between the far, far darker than a Kansas farm life that Betty was leading as a young aspiring actress in Los Angeles, fresh off the boat from Saskatoon or wherever the fuck she was from, Ontario. There you go. Where she won a swing dancing contest, hence the opening shit of the movie.
Where if she ever was optimistic when she first arrived, she is not that now.
Yeah, there is a question posed narratively just by the darkness of her performance. There is something there, and the mind is given something to latch onto, not textually like it's a fucking Netflix series, but by the fact that she stares at certain objects, like especially the blue key, and there's something about this darkness. This is not a normal darkness. This is a dark darkness, and we jump into her erratic fantasies that are happening in relationship to certain objects. A kind of ex-roommate / ex-girlfriend shows up, who is the girl who they met. Oh, we traded apartments, but there's this weird implication there might be something deeper there, which I like that's left ambiguous. Picks up this ashtray and this whatever, and then the ashtray is used to kind of throw us back in time to a flashback where we see Diane Selwyn and not Rita, but looks a lot like Rita, Camilla, the very sexy, red lipsticked, much more glamorous.
Camilla Rhodes, I think the name of the girl.
The name of the This Is the Girl.
Yes, the name of the This Is the Girl. And we see that she is Camilla Rose. She seems very, very glamorous. Camilla Rhodes. She seems very glamorous. She seems to be the power dynamic seems. Bless you. The power dynamic seems utterly inverted because now Camilla seems to be the one that's in charge. We see a moment between them making out on the couch where then Camilla is the one who says, I don't think we should do this anymore. And Betty has a very negative reaction to that and starts grabbing at her and trying to, it's unclear what she's trying to do, but you get the sense she's trying to shove her hand down her pants. Just has a acutely strong, disturbed reaction to maybe being broken up with by Camilla. We then go to the set of this 50s movie that maybe Betty, in our fantasy world, was on the cusp of being discovered to be in, were it not for the intercession of dark forces far greater than herself. But in reality, she's just sort of an extra who we find out is happy to be there because Camilla is the star. Camilla is the actress who is playing the lead, and Camilla, despite the fact that it being implied, is a little more than just a friend of Betty. Camilla is very much becoming enthralled with and having an affair with this powerful director played by Justin Theroux, yada, yada, yada. So we see that Betty is kind of becoming an afterthought to the emergent romance between two very powerful people and is feeling a little bit left behind, as we then realize that even the predicament we find Rita in at the beginning of being in the back of an ominous limousine climbing a hill towards Mulholland Drive with two drivers in the front seat, that intimidating but ultimately kind of banal circumstance she finds herself in is the backdrop of the would-be assassination, car accident, amnesia of Rita, as we see Betty very happy to be invited, not Betty, I'm sorry, Diane, Naomi Watts, very happy to be invited to a party with
thinking she's
with
like
Camilla.
Rita's +1.
Yeah, she gets a phone call. She answers the phone. It's Camilla. We see all the lamp and everything there, and she gets out of the car. She's pulled out by Camilla. She goes up a secret path. There's no car accident. There's no would-be assassination yet that happens. And she finds out a little too late that this is where we learn really the facts. We realize that Coco, her loving, kind of motherly landlady, is not her mother, but Justin Theroux's mother. So all of that loving care and attention that was being placed on her by this kind of old Hollywood lady is in fact his love and attention, not Diane's. We discover that this is in fact the engagement announcement party. At least that's where it's happening between Justin Theroux and Diane and Camilla. And Naomi Watts has an acutely strong negative reaction to that, enough to elicit applause from the crew, as we were discussing previously. And then we snap from that moment to one of the other loose threads in this very kind of somewhat Tarantinian multi-thread movie that is set in L.A., blah, 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 which is a scumbag guy who we met in a great earlier scene that was very funny when he's killing a guy.
He's very bad at his job.
Very bad at his job. It's a whole comedy of murder that plays out. We see her now across the table from him.
Who seems much better at his job
now and far less dopey.
Yes.
And basically tells her, and this is the key to the whole thing, no pun intended, that she's paying him money to, as it strongly implied, kill Camilla. He is a hitman of some kind. That is, in fact, maybe even what that money was in that little satchel that Rita had in the dream. Because that is the place they found the blue key, this weird, abstract, triangular blue key. But now in banal, regular, non-dreamlike reality, he just hands her a regular, stupid blue key like you might get at Home Depot and says, "I'll leave this, and then you'll know it's done." Yeah, where we discussed, and then you'll know it's done. And so we now know when she was in her apartment, she's staring at the blue key. We know that this highly disturbed Naomi Watts we've met is the Naomi Watts who is now reacting with, like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, the guilt of she's found this key. She knows that things have been done that can't be undone. When she has that fantasy of Camilla showing up in her apartment, and she's like, "Camilla, you're back," and starts crying, it's because Camilla is dead and she paid someone to kill her, blah, blah, blah. And that is the dark secret at the center of the dream, that the entire dream, the elaborate fantasy life that perhaps now, as she's living in this shitty apartment, drinking, maybe she's zonked out on something, she's sleeping all day in that bed, maybe she's just dreaming and dreaming and dreaming of that fantasy life, of that better life, of the person who Diane Selwyn was when she got off the bus, which might have been more like Betty, stars in her eyes, "Thank you, darling. You're gonna see me on the big screen one day." Before it was all crushed out of her, she's fantasizing about what if that had been preserved, that innocence had not been smashed and had instead had the opportunity to blossom. But it's not just that. She also fantasizes about all those people who look down on her being punished. She fantasizes about the powerful actress who was the girl. Camilla was the girl. This is the girl. What if she, were a wounded puppy that I had to take care of and needed me the way I need her? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to throw in this fun extra that it also implied that not only was Camilla Rhodes getting married or getting engaged to the director, she's also had an open mistress that was the girl in the fantasy.
Yes.
So not only was Diane not good enough to be, an out and proud wife, quote unquote, but she's also not good enough to be the mistress. She is
Yes,
she's the side chick.
She has been replaced.
Yes,
that is the
yes,
idea.
yes.
Someone else has been cast to play her part, even in her own life, which is actually, and that's which kind of it puts an interesting exclamation point on the darkness of that scene where Justin Theroux casts that girl. That girl, another blonde with a short haircut, presumably takes the role that Betty in the fantasy would have gotten were it not for the intercession of all of these dark forces. And in her actual life, she's perhaps told by Camilla, well, I'm getting married now, I'm getting engaged, I couldn't possibly keep this thing going on with you. And she finds out that none of that's in fact true, that she's gone on to have a female lover, a blonde female lover that she's flaunting in front of everyone, perhaps the same way she once flaunted Diane, except it's someone else. She has literally recast the role, and Betty is now on the outs of that too. And that's the moment that's too much, that then thrusts us into the scene where she's, with the assassin and all of that, blah, blah, blah. And
that
stuff.
takes us to the big reveal at the very end of the movie. Diane, in fact, is the corpse.
Yes, exactly. And that's where it all essentially comes full circle, because we visit, after we realize all of this, the man in the alley, which we have not talked about at all, because there's yet another. The one thing is that Mulholland Drive is just a film that, I don't play video games, but I once heard a video game developer say that, and I've thought about this with regard to films, is that he said it's a job of a video game, like the early levels of a video game, to teach you how to play the video game, so that then once you know how to play it, you can actually play the video game. So it's like increasingly large jumps and things that teach you how to jump and teach. So it's like thinking about that experience, the experience teaching you how to play the game, et cetera, et cetera. And I've thought about that with regard to art, especially with cinema, which is this kind of very multifaceted linear experience, that if you're going to do something very abstract, if you're going to do something weird, if you're going to do something like David Lynch does, one of the things, just on a very practical craft level, if nothing else, even though I think he's doing most of these things intuitively, one of the things that differentiates a David Lynch film like Mulholland Drive from many other, like a Lindsay Anderson film, like Britannia Hospital, which gets very abstract in the beginning, it's other things, but it doesn't necessarily teach you how to interpret the abstractions within the film. David Lynch literally includes scenes at the beginning of Mulholland Drive, just like he does kind of in Twin Peaks, and just like he does to a lesser extent, but it's kind of present in Blue Velvet. He teaches you what the movie is saying. He teaches you how to watch the movie. He teaches you he gives you the Rosetta Stone, the decoder ring, to decipher the film that you're about to watch. And one of the best ways he does that is in this opening diner scene with eyebrows. And I know the actor has a name. He's a character actor. You know him from his eyebrows. He's been in a lot of things.
He was in Dune recently as the dude who was poisoned to death. He was in the sequel.
Oh, actually, no, that's a different creepy guy. That's the guy from The Dark Knight. That's a different guy. Who gets poisoned to death. Yeah, but he's the other guy with the eyebrow. He's been in a bunch of stuff. He was in he's in the beginning of Idiocracy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He had a slightly earlier creepy face guy trajectory than Dark Knight Dune guy. But he's sitting in a diner with a friend, or it's unclear. He's sitting in a diner and he says, I wanted you to come and meet me, at this Winkies, because I had a dream. I had a dream about this Winkies in particular. You were standing over there, and then there was this face, and you just see, again, just like Betty later on, because wink, wink, this literally the place is called Winkies, because the film is winking at you. This guy is Betty. This is a different version of Diane Betty. Diane Betty is... because as we experience at the exact moment later on that she's hiring the assassin, she sees this eyebrows guy and kind of projects herself into this, that he needs, it seems, to overcome this terrible fear that's literally starting to affect him even in the diner, that if he walks around that dark corner and actually looks at what's going on behind the surface of things in the alley behind the Winkies instead of the Winkies itself, that he dreams that there is this horrible, horrible face that has been haunting him. And so this guy, it's unclear, it's somewhat implied that this guy might be his therapist, says, all right, and goes and walks him around the alley. And the film takes all of this time, puts you deeply, subjectively within this guy's POV, as we anticipate in the middle of day, going around and seeing what's in this alley. We go around the corner to see what's in this alley, and what do we see?
A homeless person.
That's in one way of putting it, but a very scary face. We see a very, very scary face that as soon as it is revealed, because it's all rotting and weird and dirty and twisted, terrifies him nearly to death, it seems, and he passes out. And it's only at this point that we are first introduced to the starry-eyed Betty, who is kind of emerging from light in the LAX airport, getting and arriving in Los Angeles. And in that way, it's almost like that scene is a kind of purgatory or switching over between Betty's reality. This is Betty falling asleep. Diane, I should say. Between Diane falling asleep and then actually becoming Betty is this idea that what's there on the surface might not be real, but it might be there as a rosier facade than something truly dark that's below the surface that we can't even name, that if we acknowledge it's even there, could annihilate us and the reality that we currently have. Just like that guy's reality is annihilated and he becomes Betty a moment later by seeing the face of darkness.
By the way, I think there is one more moment that happens between that and us seeing Betty. Because I remember the image immediately preceding seeing Betty for the first time is the dark red lamp, the lamp that was later in Diane Selwyn's apartment. We get there because I believe series of scary phone calls with scary guys saying the girl is still missing. I believe it starts with the little-headed guy. The girl is still missing. He calls one meaty-headed guy. We only see the back of his head, who then gets that message and pass it on to what we can tell by his voice is the hitman that we see later. The girl is still missing, or the same, or whatever. And then the hitman makes a phone call, and the phone call results into leads to a phone by a ominous red lamp. And then as soon as we see that ominous red lamp and that phone, then we see Betty arriving at the airport.
Which is interesting because within the confines of the dream, the ultimate power, the dark power behind everything is the little head, big body guy in the wheelchair. He's implied that he's the studio head. He's the closest thing to the cowboy. And yet, the chain of command that he responds to, that takes us to weird stranger phones in dark places, goes all the way back up to Betty, or sorry, I should say to Diane, to herself. So the dark forces that are interceding and stopping her from being the one cast in the movie and all of that is in fact herself. It is her own darkness. It is in fact perhaps what is revealed in moments like when Camilla is saying things like, I don't think we should do this anymore, and she has this acutely angry reaction to it. That idea that maybe Betty had a darkness to her. Maybe Diane had a darkness to her, a possessiveness, a jealousy, a something that turned everyone off of her and turned her away and made her, as she said when she talks about having auditioned for Bob whatever, the same director who her amazing audition was. She mentions this at the engagement party. She says, he didn't think much of me. So she does not have the emotional awareness and clarity to be this great actress. She's probably insecure and jealous, as we see in all of these things. So even though she feels like the victim of all of these terrible dark forces, studios, powerful directors stealing my girlfriend, all of these horrible things that are the things stopping her and forcing her, but because were it not for these circumstances, she never would have done something as dark as try and kill Camilla or anything like that. She never would have done that. But if you go high enough up the chain of subconscious command, the chain of spiritual command in the dream world, we realize that the fate, her fate is not in her stars, or the fault is not in her stars, but in herself. In the idea that it is some darkness that lives in Betty that corrupted her chances of ever being. And maybe it was because LA put that darkness in her. Maybe it did crush it out of her, but that darkness is ultimately what consumed her, yada, yada, yada. And all of these powerful forces, the Consigliani brothers, or whatever the fuck their names are, all those guys are Betty, or Diane, are her own darkness consuming her, whereas if she could have conquered that darkness and it could have been transmuted into the light that she's now dreaming of when she creates the character of Betty in her mind, if she could have attained that level of transcendent innocence, maybe she would have gotten those auditions, maybe she would have been in those movies, maybe she would have yada 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 yada, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, it is and I think what's cool about David Lynch is that he doesn't approach this idea cerebrally. He does not approach this idea intellectually with that kind of cool distance. He approaches the idea emotionally. He approaches the idea, I would argue, with far less emotional distance than something like Three Women does at the end of Three Women, with the birth, which I believe is a very emotional movie, but it is very abstract and cold and distancing relative to, and you can feel this in every frame of Mulholland Drive, David Lynch being in love with Betty, in love with Betty's innocence. David Lynch feeling to his core the tragedy of the loss of that innocence as a real felt thing, in the same emotions that a lot of other pretentious filmmakers might reserve for, some harrowing social drama about a poor person who was put upon by the system, yada yada yada, where where they would juice every emotion in the score and whatever, just like, this is an important story I want to tell. His films, his abstract films, are not cold and distancing. I mean, Three Women is a very emotional film, but it is still much, 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 much more cerebral, and I think less felt, and it is an intuitive film, but it does not hit you in the soft underbelly the way that Mulholland Drive does. I think that's why people are addicted to seeing Mulholland Drive over and over and over again. That's why we love it, is because he loves Betty. He loves her innocence. He feels how tragic the loss of that innocence is. So at the end of the movie, when we finally visit again the homeless, creepy, faceless man in the alley, when we finally revisit him and he drops the blue box and the little old people from the beginning of the movie come out and chase Betty down inside of her own apartment, and she's screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming.
They're still laughing.
And they're laughing and laughing at her, and she grabs the gun. And of course, what could be more? I mean, just the idea that that those people and all of the expectations, those are her grandparents, those are her friends, those are all the people who wished her well on her path, now seeing and laughing at this horrible, twisted kind of thing she's become. And what else could one do other than those circumstances, other than she grabs a gun, puts it to her face, boom, kills herself. And then the film doesn't end coldly there. We then are given all of this beautiful music from Angelo Badalamenti, and we see Betty return in a spotlight, and there's all of this light and movement on her, and we see her soul, Betty, liberated from the corporeal form, this purgatory that Diane has found herself in, and she returns, and when it ends on this transcendent note, which you could say is transcendently tragic, in that we're remembering Betty, and we're experiencing the tragedy of the loss of that innocence, but on another way, in a kind of spiritual level, it is also a happy ending, in that once she is cut loose from her mortal coil finally, and all of these dreams and reveries and guilt and all of these things, maybe her soul, which is then liberated, is who Betty is, and all of that innocence. And that's what we're seeing when that spotlight hits her at the end of the movie, and there's all that applause, is that she finally does become a star, but she does not become a movie star, but she becomes a star, like a star in the night sky, etc., etc., etc. And again, just very, very, very powerful movie, just a very good one. What have we not talked about? It's a long movie. I don't know. It's like
Oh, well, one interesting thing about it is how it came about
That's a good
as
point.
a
Go ahead.
television show initially.
Yes.
It was initially a pilot for a television show, Mulholland Drive, and was not picked up like Twin Peaks was picked up. And but like Twin Peaks, when he made the pilot for Twin Peaks, he had to, for its international release, had to complete the story by filming an ending for it in order to make it a complete short or complete feature film that could be released internationally. It has Bob as the killer and all that good stuff. And but in a much more inspired, and then of course the rest of the series got made, and that is primarily how we know Twin Peaks. But in the case of Mulholland Drive, what we had was essentially, I am thinking the world, for the most part, is the world of the first 2/3, 3/4 of the movie as the pilot, with many story threads that could potentially go on for quite a while. Will the director Adam ever get together with his assistant and all that kind of stuff that could be picked up down the line? But David Lynch had an inspired idea of how to wrap the story up, as it were, by shooting some extra material, essentially the material that comprises the last, third or quarter of the movie, so as to make the whole thing, wrapped up in a meaningful thematic bow, if not a fully, straightforward narrative bow. And with the idea that the show would have eventually been going in those directions, eventually been unpacking those ideas and revealing those things. But here, in the very sudden, Band-Aid ripped off, wake up now, little girl, and seeing all of that, what we see in the last chunk of the movie, what's all shot later to complete it as a movie. And then, oddly enough, it was released and became one of his most successful and beloved movies.
Yeah, which is interesting also to think about. He's shooting some of that stuff of Diane as opposed to Betty under different circumstances with a different intention, which also probably on a subtle level is why the reality that Diane lives in feels so acutely different. It's shot even under, he's shooting even material for a TV show that optimistically is going to get picked up, and then it doesn't, and he doesn't get cast, just like Betty. And then as Diane, he shoots the rest of the material for Diane's, which of course, again, just some fun stuff there. But I think that also accounts for some fun artifacts of that, which is, of course, Robert Forster was hot off of winning an Academy Award, I think 2 years prior 3 years prior, whatever, for Jackie Brown. And then he shows up as a detective, does an awesome job, gets this kick-ass close-up, just looking out over Los Angeles, and that anticipates the long arc by which this man will eventually find his girl, and we never see him again. And I know that is likely an artifact of Robert Forster would have had a much larger role as a detective on Twin Peaks, Twin Peaks, haha.
He did have a role in Twin Peaks: The Return.
That's good. There you go. So that would have been cool to see. But I think part of why you see, and what I like about this is that it has, like we were saying, that multifaceted narrative that was kind of in vogue, especially among hip filmmakers in the 90s. And we think of Lynch as kind of someone who exists outside of the zeitgeist or outside of influences, but it's true and not true at the same time. I mean, Lost Highway feels very much of its time, and the choice of all of its music and everything feels very hip and contemporary. But with what was I just talking about? I was suddenly thinking about Lost Highway. What was I just talking about?
How it was similar to things in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The multifaceted narrative, it's funny because it's derived likely from the fact that it would have been a television show that could have accommodated a long arc with Justin Theroux's character spiraling down, with the Rita and Betty dynamic, with the weird, bumbling hitman, perhaps as another character, with Robert Forster, with all of these different people. And yet, because it ultimately had to be a film, it has that episodic feel that was very kind of hip coming out of the 1990s of films like, even it shares some cast members with films like Big Lebowski and and Pulp Fiction, and and Jackie Brown, obviously, which came before it. And so you has this kind of large ensemble feel, which ties it into its moment and ties it into some other films at that time, which I think is really cool. But it's fun to think of that as kind of being an incidental affect of the fact that he was trying to shoot a bunch of fucking material for a TV show that didn't happen, but he still, instead of lopping off Robert Forster and all of these different threads, he left them all there as this kind of mosaic that gives you a whole picture of this reality just in these little glimpses that you're filling all in, only to, not unlike Rashomon, ultimately rip that reality away from you and show you something that's a little bit darker. I'm referencing Rashomon not just to be pretentious, but because we talked about it last week on the episode, though that episode might come out after this one, I'm not sure. But anywho, yeah, I don't know. What was, I don't know, Mulholland Drive.
Was a TV show, isn't a movie now.
Yeah.
What could it have been?
Yes.
Could it have been, and I imagine it would have resolved itself. Well, I don't know if Twin Peaks really resolved itself, but ultimately it comes down to a similar kind of resolution as the TV show of that Mulholland Drive would have been, we can imagine, from this movie.
I'll also just throw out, if for the people who are watching it for the first time or anyone who might go and watch it after this, it does take like a day or two for, like, I think for you to really like absorb the movie. I do think like if you were to ask anyone's opinion, leaving the theater versus like a day or two later, I think your opinions will be a little bit different.
Well, I do agree with, because I think there's a lot to be deciphered, to be figured out, or even felt. To borrow a word from your generation, processed. I need to process this. But I will say, I think it is, if you are not, and again, I think too many people these days, and I don't think that anyone around this table is this, but I think too many people these days think of, I think that Netflix has had a role to play in this, think of watching movies as something very textual, as if to have an opinion about a movie is to deliver a book report on it and be able to recall its plot and why things happened causally and the way you think about it. Again, I can imagine from that standpoint, if you're the kind of person who leaves the subtitles on while you watch Netflix shows, Mulholland Drive is probably a frustrating experience because you can't answer book report questions about it. Like, but who is what, who, when, what, where happened, how, and why. It takes a minute to put
It was aliens, right?
Yeah, exactly. It takes a minute to put the whole thing together. But I would say that getting Mulholland Drive is to watch the film, have it wash over you, and to have that evocative experience, that emotional experience that I think really can only happen to its full extent in a crowded theater. I mean, again, even if you're in a half-empty theater, you're not going to fully get it. You need the big picture, you need the sound, sure, for this, but it's really about you and 200 other individuals tuning into each other and resonating on a frequency.
As I said at the beginning of this podcast, I feel like
exactly.
This movie in particular, I feel like you kind of need to see it in a theater.
I 100% agree. I think this is the kind of thing, and I think a lot of people are going to have the opportunity to do that with David, unfortunately, because of David Lynch's passing, but they're popular movies anyways to play. So if you get the chance, see it in a movie theater, because again, even if you can't answer some bullet point questions about what this or that meant, I don't care. Like no one cares. Like, it's just like, that's a fun thing to do, sure, but you don't need any of that to get Mulholland Drive. If you watch Mulholland Drive and you fall in love with the characters and you fall in love with Betty and you feel the tragedy of the loss of Betty in the loss of innocence of Diane, and you mourn that in the end of the film, and it moves you, you get the movie. The rest of it's just figuring out, where all the screws go, exactly. But that's the movie. The feeling is the movie, and the feeling is especially resonant in a crowded theater. Well, since we've been going on for a while now, I think we should probably start to wrap up, which means there's only one thing left to do. We have to give away the Full Metal Jacked Award and decide who is the most jacked person in Mulholland Drive. And you can take this to the bank, folks.
This is a super easy answer. I don't know the name of the actor. I don't know the name of the actor. He is, of course, the actor who comes in as the mafia enforcer to beat up Billy Ray Cyrus and the cheating wife.
Yes.
Who is a ex WWE wrestler who was one of the two giant alien bounty hunters who were sent to take down Hulk Hogan in
Was he
Suburban
really?
Commando. Yeah.
Oh,
in
that guy?
in
Yeah,
Suburban
yeah.
Commando, the two because they needed to find two guys who were bigger than Hulk Hogan, so they found this guy whose name Kyle is looking up right now on the computer. And the Undertaker, an unmasked, out-of-character Undertaker, was the other guy.
I remember the Undertaker.
Keep
was
that in
Icon.
mind for your Kevin Baconisms in the future.
That's
When
right.
you're playing 6 levels of bacon.
But
Anyway.
he gained several giant tire around the midsection by this point, but that only adds to the character of this mafia enforcer
Yes,
who is
excellent.
looking for Adam Kessler.
Nice.
or
Well,
something.
his name is Tony Longo. Tony Longo. So there you go.
Is
the name
Tony
of it.
Longo still with us?
He is not.
He is not.
Passed away
Oh, wow.
in 2015.
Oh, wow.
So,
R.I.P. Tony Longo.
yeah, and apparently, his movie career started all the way back. He was in Fletch all the way back in the day. So there
What
you
year
go.
did Mulholland Drive came out? I feel like
2001.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty recent. Jeez.
Yeah. So anyway, yay, Tony Longo. You are now officially the most jacked person. I mean, that's kind of an easy one because he's fucking huge. I love Taylor. I knew that Taylor was going to love the part where the girl jumps on his back and starts punching him.
that was...
And so I got to anticipate, like, Taylor's going to love this. And then she jumps on his back and starts punching him. And Taylor was like, ha!
I like a feisty loser.
That's
I like
right.
someone who's inevitably going to lose, but
like-
still very feisty about it.
Punch.
Punch in the face, and he just cartoonishly goes whack, and
wallops
then
her.
she falls.
That's right. Okay, well, cool. Well, now you guys know that the most jacked person in Mulholland Drive is Tony Longo. Pretty obvious. I think you've earned it. Rest in peace. But so for everyone else, I guess we'll wrap up. Mulholland Drive, rest in peace, David Lynch. And if you get a chance to see Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, or anything in a theater soon, please do it because it is not the same watching it at home. It is not the same
It really
watching it on
isn't.
streaming as it is watching it in a crowded theater.
Whoa!
That's
tied
right.
that in so
and
easy.
I'll just say, so for a crowded theater, I'm Kyle.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Cliff.
All right, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Once upon